Welcome everybody to this week's We Need to Talk About. And the thing that we need to talk about this week is race and racism. So it's great to have Sefa with us today to share her insights and her personal experiences on that. We're going to do things a bit differently for this week's conversation in a couple of ways. The first thing that we're doing is we are releasing this, as you can see, as a video rather than as an audio recording. My experience listening to podcasts is I'll stick my headphones in, and I'll do the washing up and the ironing, and it will become background noise, and I'll hear a couple of different things, but I won't take everything in. Sefa's going to be sharing her personal experiences and her personal stories, and because we think that's really important, we want to encourage you to give it your whole attention. So sit down, watch this like you would watch something on TV, and be really attentive to the things that Sefa's going to say, because we have so many things that we need to learn. We're not going to learn them unless we start giving this the attention that it deserves. The second thing that we're doing that's a bit different is we're releasing this without any editing. Often I will get a question wrong, or I will use the wrong word or something like that, and Mark edits it to make me sound more intelligent than I really am. Because we know that we've all got to learn, and we've all got to take this journey together, and we are leaving all of my mistakes in, which means that there will be times when this conversation is awkward and uncomfortable. So I'm a white person learning how to talk about race, and Sefa might well correct my language and say, actually, we don't use that word anymore, we use this word instead. That's part of our journey of learning together. So I'm really excited that we get to share that together. So Sefa, thank you so much for giving up some of your afternoon to talk with us a little bit about your experiences of race and racism. Can you begin, if you can, to tell us what's been going on in the last couple of weeks for those of us who've either missed parts of the story or missed all of it?
Okay, so I think the biggest thing that's been going on was essentially the public execution of George Floyd on a street by a white police officer, witnessed by his colleagues, witnessed by bystanders, videoed, and those videos have pretty much done the rounds. They've gone around the world, and we have seen all the different angles and how he was held down for such a long period of time. And I guess it's not the kind of content that we are used to seeing in our feeds. And it's by no means the first, and sadly probably not the last time that something like this is going to happen. And there have been a couple of things that have happened this year, a couple of other people who have kind of essentially had someone else make the decision as to whether they live or die. They've been Black people, people of colour, and it's just outrageous really to see how it's kind of played out. A, that it happened, B, that it took 9 minutes and nobody was able to step in and intervene and do anything about it. That even though that there was videos that were clear for all of us to see, that the arrest of the police officers who were involved was taken so long. There are just so many things. When I look at it, I'm thinking, what on earth is going on? Like, we're talking about people's lives, and in particular the life of one man. And yeah, it almost seems like a movie that you kind of stop and you're looking at it and you're thinking, how is this happening in 2020? And how is it that aside from the Black people on the side of the road, there wasn't a voice of reason in that situation? I don't know whether any of you have seen the officer who was standing directly behind the officer who was leading, who essentially just looked like he was kind of watching someone scrape blue tack off the underside of a table, completely disinterested in his facial experience as to what was going on right in front of him. And in some ways, even that was just so offensive on so many different levels. And at the same time, kind of looking at that and weighing that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. That is kind of, you can put that up there with one of the worst things that happened. It's happened before, unfortunately it may happen again, but below that there is like a whole chasm of other different experiences. And so when I extrapolate some of the things that I've been through, I'm like, gosh, actually if you extend that to the nth degree, that's what it looks like. And that's terrifying. really.
It's the same problem expressed differently, isn't it, in
Mm-hmm.
different settings? How do you how do you feel, and how are you making sense of what's happened in the last couple of weeks with George Floyd?
I think I had a mixture of emotions. There've been a couple of days where I've literally just sat on the floor and cried. Like I don't necessarily have the words to articulate all the emotions that I see watching those videos and reading the posts. And then at the same time, there's kind of like a level of despondency that I recognize in myself, because I'm like, you know what? We've been here before. We've been around this rodeo, and in 3 weeks, Instagram would have moved on. It'll be swept underneath the carpet. The Black community will remember, and everybody else will forget. And yeah, it is really, really hard. And then to kind of be stuck in that commentary of wanting to contribute to the conversation, wanting things to change, and to be able to help people see things the way that I see them. And then also dealing with, there was a post I saw earlier of some people have set up what they've called the George Floyd challenge, and it's white guys in America kneeling on each other's necks with beers. Like, I don't have the words to articulate how, on how many levels that it just hurts. It just hurts a lot. And I've I found on a number of occasions the most appropriate thing that I found for myself is to sit in silence or cry, because I look and I scroll and it's unbelievable to me. I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, yeah, that's mad, isn't it? And particularly that it would now that racism and kind of racially motivated murder will be glamorized to the extent that guys in America are treating that like it's sport. That is,
Mm.
yeah, yeah,
And I
wow.
think it is that there is also a part of me, and probably a part of lots of Black people all the way around the world, who know that there is a high chance that the men who did this won't get convicted, that they will walk free or they'll have shortened sentences. And yet we've all seen with our eyes, like, no one's doctored these videos. Like, we can see as clear as day what happened. And the thought that despite all of that, that somebody could walk away and carry on with their life as normal without there being consequences for those actions. I, it's like being between anger and depression. Like, where do you sit? Anger makes you want to do something, but you might not necessarily have the power to do the thing that needs to cause change to happen.
Yeah, you said before that in a couple of months the Black community will remember and the white community will have forgotten and moved on. How does it feel? Because that probably will be the case, won't it? That's happened before. There's no reason to suggest that won't happen again unless something seismic changes. How does that feel? Because that feels real. Like that feels hard for me to hear.
This is going to sound horrendous, but to a certain extent, we're used to it. It is Groundhog Day, and it is devastating, but we equally can't live focusing on that devastation. It I guess that they're like a list of things that will be unresolved, and they will just stay that way, unresolved, unfixed, and it adds to the level of pain that a community holds. If it's never dealt with, it's almost like another chit on the pile. Okay, well, we can stick that with the thousands of others, the other instances, and I don't even, perhaps I don't necessarily even give myself the space to experience all of the emotions that come with that anymore, because even this, and we've not had the trial and all the rest, I'm emotionally exhausted already, and we're like almost to some extent right at the beginning of this story, and you can't live like that. To a certain extent, you have to, well, I have to kind of clock off and be like, okay, that's happened, I can't change it. I still have to figure out what my life looks like. How do I move on from that place? And that's hard, without then becoming completely numb to like, okay, there goes another one.
How do you, as I've been kind of seeing stuff play out on social media over the last, particularly this week, it feels like kind of making statements about race as white people has become a fashionable thing to do. And my social media feed is full of people from my social background making declarations, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure that lots of it comes from the right place, but it feels like it's a race to be woke and it's a race to be fashionable. What's your perspective on that? How do you feel about the way that it's been portrayed and it's playing out?
I think it highlights people's motivation. I think having personal relationships with people makes it a lot easier. I've had friends message friends, call and send me things and said like, hey, I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of this, what do you think? I want to respond and I want to respond appropriately. And I'm like, yes, like I'm all for that. I'm all for helping people get language and structure around what that looks like. But then there are absolutely people who are abusing that. And I think for me, the most alarming things have been like Blackout Tuesday, where people put black boxes on social media. And someone told me that if you tag I tagged Black Lives Matter in my Blackout Tuesday post. And they said, well, actually that blocks people from getting really important content. So you need to take that off. And I was like, oh my gosh, I felt really guilty. I thought I didn't know that. So I went back and edited my post and then clicked on the Blackout Tuesday hashtag and thought, like, I'm actually just interested to see what content other people have been posting. And then within all of these black boxes, you have pictures of white faces who've written Black Lives Matter on their forehead. And like, really? Like, because actually now when I scroll through this, what I see is a picture of you in your bikini in the sun with an ice cream with Black Lives Matters across your forehead. That doesn't, that's not, again, I don't really feel like I have words for that. It's cool. It makes them look cool and everyone's doing the thing that everybody else has done. But then it's been interesting then going back, looking at some of the accounts, and a lot of people are saying like, hey, stay quiet for the week. So for my professional account, I'm not posting anything else because I want those voices to be amplified. But for lots of people, Wednesday rolled along and it's business as usual. Hey, come to my salon and buy this spray tan when lockdown's over. And I'm like, oh gosh, you had an opportunity to essentially amplify the voices of others who weren't heard. You took the token, you used it, and now it's business as usual. And so some of it feels really empty. But what I am loving seeing is that I've got lots of friends and lots of people on social media who are sharing good content from other people. So some of my friends who live in Seattle in the States, they've been kind of going on Black businesses, Black pages and saying, well, actually, I don't have the language and I don't know the know-all how about to talk about this. So I'm going to share good content from people who are from that community and do. And I think that is incredibly powerful. And I love seeing that kind of content, being like, oh, yeah, you know what? If you can amplify our voices and you can support our message without trying to kind of like piggyback on it, that's really powerful. That's what allyship looks like to me.
Yeah, that's okay. That's really interesting. That's really helpful for us to hear. And I think sometimes we can think that we are being allies and advocates and we're kind of speaking out, but we do it in a way that isn't helpful and we're counterproductive in that. So for us to think critically and be aware of the impact of what we're saying, and actually there's a risk that we make it about a white person's wokeness when actually it's about a different thing. It's about a person's pain and suffering, and not about the public perception of me and my social media presence or the things that I'm saying.
And there's almost like there's like a little vein that kind of runs under that sometimes when I read some of these posts, I get like, oh, you're trying to prove that you don't have a problem with race. And actually, sometimes in the tone and the way people write things, I'm like, oh, actually, reading this as a Black person, you definitely have an issue about race. And that is okay if you are willing to acknowledge that I struggle with this, or I find it hard, or I don't have the language. And so it's really interesting sometimes it's just like a little nuanced thing, and you're like, I see what the motivation is. You're trying to justify yourself in, well, I'm not a racist because
Mm.
fill in the blank with whatever you like. And that is like, okay, I I see that. I see what you're trying to do there. And that's well, I hope that wasn't the point of the post, but you're trying too hard to be woke.
Yeah. You mentioned before that what we're seeing with George Floyd and with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, and that's the most extreme. It's really easy for us to look at that and think this is a problem in America, isn't it? And this is happening somewhere else in another group of people, and we can point the finger and sit in judgment. But when you said that you were happy to have this conversation, I started doing a bit of research on the kind of effects of racism in this country, and particularly in Liverpool. And it's our history and our city is built on racial inequality. 60% of slaves came through Liverpool, 1.1 million slaves. We were right at the centre of things. You look at the improper use of stop and search and the kind of impact on riots that's had. We are not exempt from that in this country. And then you look at the different life outcomes for people from Black, Asian minority ethnic groups. This is happening now, and it's happening in our country, and that means that we can't afford to sit in judgment completely on another country, because we need to look at ourselves and evaluate the way that we're behaving. So with that in mind, Sefa, would you share a bit of your story and your experiences with us?
Yeah, before I do that, when the Brexit vote happened that morning when we all woke up, we had a tiny little window into what racism looks like in the UK. And it was almost like George Orwell's 1984. Like, was it you? Did you do it? Was it? And I remember working in the hospital, and I was working in A&E, and patients coming in, and like that level of suspicion, and then the increase in hate crimes and hate speech. That stuff was there all along. Brexit just helped us see it. And so when people who are living here, what I'd encourage you to do is remember what that week after the Brexit vote looked and felt like. That stuff didn't appear overnight. It was there all along. Brexit just gave it a voice and brought it up to the surface.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, my story. So I was born in Britain. I was born in 1990 in Bournemouth. My parents were highly skilled migrant workers to the UK. Ghana had a governmental agreement whereby lots of doctors who trained in Ghana came to England to do specialty training. And there's a whole generation of us here that happened as part of that agreement. My brother was then born in Plymouth, and we spent the kind of first few years of our lives living on the South Coast. Even though we were born in Britain, we didn't have British passports until we were in our teenage years. So I still remember queuing with my mum on the doorstep of the French embassy and having the door shut in our face at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because they're like, sorry, we're closed and we're not seeing anyone until next week. So I remember, as much as, because I was born here, I wasn't an immigrant, I remember what it felt like to be an immigrant in a foreign land. And living in Plymouth was cool. We had a big Ghanaian community. And so in many ways, I didn't really have a complete grasp of what living in Britain felt like until we moved to North Wales. And we became the only Black family for miles and miles in all directions for a really long time. And I remember waking up saying to my dad, like, Dad, like, where are we? What are we doing here? And it wasn't the life that we were used to. We used to have a Ghanaian family above us and below us, one to our left and to our right. We'd go to church together, we'd have meals together. And so I felt very connected to our Ghanaian community then. I'd go back home to Ghana, Christmas, Easter, summer, half terms. I was hardly ever in the UK. School wasn't in session. But then in the early 2000s, we moved to Wales and my dad's job. And like I said, we were the only Black family for miles. And that was really, really different. We were, again, I guess, outsiders in a closed community, with the added barrier that lots of people spoke Welsh, and there were lots of people who were suspicious about outsiders, and we most definitely were outsiders. So then when I moved to Liverpool, I was like, oh, thank heavens I get to escape. And Liverpool for me has kind of been, I guess, a safe place in lots of ways. I think if I'd moved somewhere else, there's a quite high possibility that I'd have chosen to move back to Ghana by now. But I've been able to make a home here and be myself here. Whereas in North Wales, if I walk around with my hair like this, bearing in mind we've been part of that community now for over 15 years, there are still people who will turn and whisper and look and pass funny comments, even though they know me, they know my family. I don't get that here. So that's good. But I've kind of settled into a place where I would probably describe myself as a third culture kid. I would say that I'm Ghanaian and I would say that I'm British. And sometimes it really frustrates people because they're like, well, you can't be both. I'm like, well, I am. And in some areas, I'm very, very Ghanaian. In other areas, I'm very, very British. And sometimes it's hard to tell where kind of one bit stops and the other bit begins. But yeah, that's me, and that's us and my little before.
Okay, and so from that kind of sweep of your life experience, how have you experienced racism?
So I was thinking about this, and so when I think about racism, I think about things that have happened to me, and then I think about institutional things as well. So I've kind of jotted down that there are 5 different ways that I would describe as having experienced racism. So first one was when I was a kid. So I used to get bullied at school for being black. I was asked if I ran across the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to get here, whether I lived in trees, whether I was a monkey, whether I moonbathed, whether I was bathed in chocolate. And a lot of that stuff, as hurtful as it was, kind of in some ways I at the time I attributed to kind of childish ignorance that kids don't know and kids just say things. So it was hurtful. I'd go home, I would talk about it, and it would be like, well, that's just what people are like, and sometimes people say things. I think probably from my childhood, the most poignant moment was when I was in a YMCA summer school and I'd made friends with a white girl, and her grandfather moved her to the YMCA centre on the other side of town because he didn't want her to have a black friend. And that was like, I was 9, 10, and yeah, they just weren't happy that their kid was playing with a black child, and so they moved her. So there were kind of like experiences that happened in school and around school. I used to get laughed at and bullied in school for having a body that was disproportionate, for having an African accent when I turned up to school in the morning, because obviously I've been in my Ghanaian community all night. And interesting, conversely, I'd get home in the evening and they'd be like, what's that voice that you're making? And so it kind of worked both ways. So as a child, there were kind of comments which on the surface you might kind of think are quite funny. They're the kind of things that you would see in comedy on TV. But I heard a lot of those things. And then as a family, we experienced some aggression when we moved to Wales. So we got called burnt pizza. These kids put a brick through our window one day. Like we had people kind of coming up to us with trolleys, running trolleys into the back of us, telling us to get back to where we came from when we were out together as a family. So there was kind of like my childhood experiences. And obviously at that time, all I knew was that I'm black, I'm different, and that means a lot to some people. Then as I got older, so as an adult, it's become like a little bit more subtle. So things that kind of go a little bit under the surface. Somebody who says something and you're like, oh, actually, I'm not sure that what you mean is what you mean. You're actually trying to say something else. And figuring out that you hit glass ceilings in workplaces, or even to get an interview for a job. I've had comments from colleagues who've said things like, oh, aren't you exotic and your hair so authentic? Which on the surface doesn't seem like much, but at the same time, like, what does that mean? I'm not really sure what you're trying to get at with that comment. Or patients saying things like, oh, you speak really good English for a woman of your stature. or haven't you done well? Like you've managed to achieve a lot for a woman of your background. I'm like, what? Someone who was born on the south coast of England in the 90s. So I think the way that I experienced it as an adult and as a child has been quite different. The things that I experienced as a child were quite overt. It was quite clear what people were trying to say. But I guess as we get older, we become a bit better at kind of packaging the kind of things that we're trying to get across. And then I guess I would divide that up again between, I've put these down as muted things and aggressive things. So people saying things like, do you moon babe, you speak very good English, then they're offensive, but they're not aggressive. Whereas like bricks through windows, racial slurs when I go out for a run, people pushing trolleys.
Sorry, just go on. So when you're going out for a run, people will like say things, shout things?
Yeah. In Kensington, in Newsham Park, in Wavertree Botanical Gardens.
Okay.
And it's
so
not
in Liverpool in 2020, you can't go for a run without someone saying something.
Yeah, so I either go with headphones or I go early in the morning when no one else is around other than the other ethnic minorities who are running. Or I go later on in the evening when everybody is asleep. But I'd love to come home. I love to come home and go for a run after work if the weather's nice. But I don't think I've ever done that without headphones and not had either a comment about my gender or my pace or my race made whilst I'm out in this area. I don't think that's ever happened, not once, unless it's been like 6 o'clock in the morning and no one's there.
By contrast, I go for a run 4 or 5 times a week and no one ever comments.
You're probably running too fast.
I mean, maybe, but I mean, I'm literally, no one comments, no one looks twice. I am completely anonymous within it. So just because of the colour of our skin and our gender, I'm having a different experience of running.
Yeah. The worst one is the slow clap as I kind of like trundle past, and that is from people of all races. So black people do that, white people do that, Asian people do that. I just want to go for a run. I just want to run. And
so they slow clap you. What do you think that's?
So I think depending on who's doing it, it's a different thing. So when black men slow clap or clap as I run past, they're like, hey, like, good for you, you're going out, you're getting fit. Because they generally seem quite pleasant, quite amused. They're the kind of people who've like stopped, and I would feel like I could stop and have a chat with them if I felt that way inclined on that run. Whereas when it is British people, it's just like, yeah, there she goes. I'm like, oh guys, like, I just want to run. Just want to run. And the interesting thing is, if people make a racial comment and I hear it, I have a blanket rule of I don't comment unless I'm running fast enough that I know I can get away. But if you don't comment, they generally tend to hurl more abuse at you. So if you don't react and you don't respond, whatever the first comment is generally tends to get worse. Or if they said something that they thought was complimentary and you don't comment, the next comment is almost always racial or has a racial tone to it, which isn't great, really.
Wow. It's a good job that racism isn't a problem in Britain, isn't it? And it's just happening in America, because that would be a nightmare if that was happening in Liverpool, wouldn't it? Wow. Absolutely. Man, Sefa, I'm so sorry that that's your experience. That's completely unacceptable, isn't it? That shouldn't be. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my workaround is I run early or with headphones or late. But I guess essentially the fact that there has to be a workaround for it is the problem in itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I would say those are kind of like the 4 ways that I experience it in my own personal life. But then there are systemic things. So I always think about in one of George Orwell's book, all men are equal, but some are more equal than others, or all men are created in God's image, but somehow we've managed, or some people have managed to twist and contort that into something else. So my most recent example of this is I recently, by a kind of culmination of strange events, ended up chatting to another dentist who started working at a private practice. And I was just asking them about what their job's like, how long they've been working there. And it turns out that this person has got a job that I have applied for 3 times in the last 2 years. And every time I've applied, they've said that they don't feel that I've got enough clinical experience for that job. And I said, okay, well, if you feel that I've not got enough clinical experience, I've not got enough clinical experience, and that's that. But having a conversation with this person who's now got that exact job, who has 3 years less clinical experience, 1 less degree than I have, and definitely doesn't have the clinical experience to make the kind of specialist category requirements of this job, you think, oh, wow, actually, maybe it wasn't just about my clinical experience, because actually on paper I'm a far more qualified candidate than the person who's now over the moon because they've got this job at this great practice that lots of people in my position would love to have. And it's just quite perplexing to sit back and go, okay, maybe his personality was a better fit, or maybe you could explain away something like that to the nth degree. But the bottom line is they wouldn't interview me because I didn't meet their minimum criteria.
Yeah.
And that is something that's really hard. And it might not be something that they've done consciously. They might not have looked at my CV, seen the picture and said, she's black, we don't want her. But there is something that has caused them to consider somebody else who they think is not qualified to take on that role in that job that had been empty for 2 years. It just seems quite perplexing.
It's racist.
Yeah. And it comes back to that all men are equal, but some are more equal than others. Like that is the best way that I could sum it up.
Yeah. And it's the kind of thing that I guess, like, if it happens once, you can kind of think, oh, that's an exception. But when it becomes a pattern, you think, now this is a systemic societal problem, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've seen that through so many different things. Like I said to you, I've been listening to this podcast and kind of just realizing that there are structures in society that put glass walls and glass ceilings. If you were to ask somebody, if you were to walk up to me and say, can you show me where this wall is? I could walk up to you and show you this pane of glass, but you'd be like, but there's nothing there. We might not necessarily have police officers pinning black people to the ground and killing them on our streets, but the impacts of racism still exists in lots of different ways. It's just a lot harder to say, right, this is exactly what it is. These are its confines and its borders and its boundaries. It's kind of like baked into the system. It's just there. And if it doesn't affect you directly at a personal level, why would you recognize it and why would you do anything about it? It's just something that exists in the system. So, for example, when I applied to Manchester to do dentistry, I applied to Manchester, King's, Liverpool, and London. And I got a flat out rejection from Manchester University. And I thought that was quite perplexing. And so did my educational supervisory person. And she interestingly was sat on a board who was meeting up with the whole load of the universities. And she pulled me aside a week afterwards and she said, like, off the record, I can tell you why your application was flat out rejected. Your application was flat out rejected because Manchester had reached their quota of Black ethnic minority candidates. So it wasn't even a case of, oh, okay, let's look at this application on its validity, what it's worth, how good this candidate is. It was we've already reached our quota. Sorry, that's going in the no pile. And obviously that was an off the record statement. I can't prove that, but that's what I was told about my application, that essentially I applied too late in their listing order to be considered within that particular category of their recruitment.
Wow, man. It's so you said a moment ago that racism is baked into the structure, and that a lot of the time we just don't notice it. And I think that's really helpful, because some of the kind of things that we've talked on, I listen to it and I think, well, I'd never yell at you when you were running, Sefa, but you know, and I would never stick a brick through your window, and I would never do that. But the thing for me that makes this conversation really important is that I benefit from a racist society. So I am privileged, I am white, and that means that doors, you know, if I applied with your grace to Manchester University to study dentistry, I would have got through because I'm white. And so I am benefiting from a racist society. I started reading yesterday Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, something like that. And he said that the kind of premise of the book is that you can't be neutral on race. You are either racist or you are anti-racist. So you either kind of support things that kind of propagate a racist society, or you are deliberately anti. And if you're neutral, then you're supporting the society. Otherwise, for me, it can't be enough for me just to be like silent and not yell at you while you're running. But
Yeah.
we need to engage, and we need to do things that will kind of support and amplify the Black community's voice to make a difference.
Because then again, you look back at what happened with George Floyd, and you think, okay, you have a police officer who is murdering a man in front of a crowd, and you have other officers who are there standing and watching by. Now, you can't say to me that the problem lies inherently in the one police officer who had his knee on his neck. Granted, he was the person who was taking active action at that point in time, but there were other people who, to greater or lesser degrees, were responsible and able to affect the outcome of that situation, who were passive, and that also contributed to the outcome.
That's such a good example of, because neutrality is never neutral, is it? Even if we want it to be. And so the officers could say, oh, you know, we didn't do anything, we were neutral, but through your inactivity and through my inactivity on issues of race, I have acted in a way that is racist and demonstrates that I'm happy with racial inequality if it's for my benefit.
And that is human nature. We like to take the path of least resistance. Nobody likes discomfort, nobody likes pain, nobody likes change. So if a situation or a particular construct of things is working for you, why would you, without prompting, feel the need to push against that and resist it? Most people wouldn't. I think that is just something that we as human beings, unless we can see something, or unless we experience it, it's really different. So when my brother's friends came with us to Ghana when we were, I think we had been 16, 17, and it was their first time being the minority, and they found it really, really strange and really bizarre. And I remember one of them turning around to saying to me, it's like, is this what you feel like at school every week? Like, yeah, like this feeling of, oh, actually I'm the only one, I'm the only voice here. That's what it's like. And I think for them, that they'd never been in a situation before where those tables had been turned in that way, and they'd never seen race that way, because they were in the comfortable position, not in the uncomfortable position.
Yeah. So it feels like the kind of eyes of the world at the moment are kind of focused on issues of race and racial inequality, and that's kind of been amplified and kind of highlighted through the murder of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. But we've seen this happen before. You know, these aren't the first people to have died as a result of racially motivated murder. Are you hopeful that this time is different, or do you think actually, you know, we might see a bit change for a couple of weeks, but things will go back to being how they were?
I think my expectation are different. I've loved seeing the the opening up on social media and seeing how many of my white friends have been willing to be vocal about this. And I think that currently we're all sat at home, we've got nothing better to do than to be on social media. And I think in terms of spreading the word and increasing people's awareness, that is going to be absolutely key and pivotal. And I guess I see this moment as it's an opportunity, it's a crossroad. And yes, we have been at crossroads 1,000 times before. The question is, will we maximize on the opportunity or will we squander it? And my hope is that we will maximize it, but my expectation is that that won't happen, which is really, it's really, really sad. I want to see change. I don't ever want to pick up my phone again and see the kind of things I've been seeing in the last week. There's part of me that's like, I can't take it. I don't want to hear this again because it hurts so much. But these things come out, they get swept under the rug, the world forgets, and we kind of go around the sun another time, and then it's like, oh, here we go, we've got another crop of things. And I think there is, to a certain extent, the Black community is stuck within a grief cycle. And when you go through grief, you go denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance. And when things get swept under the rug, whilst on the surface that looks like acceptance, it's not really acceptance because bargaining never happened. Both parties were never at the table to have the conversation. And the conversation is just the beginning. But I think what would need to change this time is that it needs to stop being seen as a Black problem, like a them problem. It needs to be an us problem. And we all need to take ownership of that. The same way that slavery came to an end because of what Black slaves were doing on plantations, getting educated, teaching, preaching, and doing some of the things that some missionaries had propagated within those communities. In the same way that we have white people in England lobbying governments, actually for slavery to be overturned, we needed both of those things to happen. Both of those things needed to exist. And both parties needed to do their part to own the problem and overturn it. And so I guess in that means that equally, as much as the Black community is willing to talk and have been open to talk for a phenomenally long time, there has to be a willingness for those on the other side of the table to turn up to the table, to listen and engage in meaningful conversation in small ways and big ways. But then it also, I guess, to use the kind of CR analogy, it involves us keeping our side of the street clean. Stereotypes don't happen by themselves. They don't come out of nowhere. And as Black communities, we also have to be responsible for some of the ways that we can propagate some of the things that people assume about our race, about our communities. We've also got to do our work to say, like, hey, actually, you know what, not every Black person is like this, not every Black person fits this stereotype. We've got to be willing to engage in that conversation and to, I guess, I don't want to say be grown up about it, but yeah, to be grown up about it. You need two grown-ups at a table having a discussion about a problem that they both want to fix. Otherwise, it's just going to be Groundhog Day, and we'll be stuck between the depression, the anger, and when everybody else forgets, they're like, oh, that's gone away now, everything's been accepted and the status quo can continue. Well, actually, that's not what that acceptance is. The acceptance is we've accepted that at this point we can't do anything about it. But that's why you see things like riots. That's why you see people like kicking off, throwing chairs and tables and saying, this is unacceptable. We're not willing to put up with it anymore. And I guess the ideal endpoint of that would be for people to be willing to come to a table to discuss what dismantling this behemoth of a thing called race looks like. Because it's not going to happen overnight. No one's going to click their fingers and it's going to disappear. It's been going on for hundreds of years, and it is baked into societies to levels that sometimes even I don't see and I don't recognize. Sometimes I listen to books and podcasts and I think, like, how did I never see this? Like the first time that I went into Marks and Spencer's and they had brown colored tights, Like, it was like a revelation. Like, I can have tights in my skin color. I'd never thought about it before. And then the next week I got into trouble at school for wearing tights that weren't skin colored because they were my skin colored. But up until that point, I'd gone into that store and I'd seen these tights and thought, oh, I could have tights that match me. It never even crossed my mind. And so I think deconstructing it and change isn't just a case of, right, we need to do this, you need to stop doing that. There is going to need to be a process of kind of deconstructing all the different ways that it's been baked in and addressing those at different levels, right from our interpersonal relationships with each other, how we do business, how we work, how government works, how housing works, how finance and equity works. It's not going to happen overnight, but I would love this to be the beginning. I would love it to be the start of the beginning of the change. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So how can we make sure that that happens? So how can we challenge the racism that we see in ourselves and the kind of desire to create an other in society that creates the distance that racism lives in?
So I was thought about this a lot last night, and my best conversations about race have always been with people who I've got a pre-existing relationship with. It's never been with a stranger or a randomer who's walked up to me. It's been with people who I know and love and care about, and who I know love and care about me. And that definitely makes it easier, because having a conversation with you, if you trip up over your words, put your foot in your mouth and chew on it, that is fine, because I know that deep down you weren't trying to say something, insinuate something, assert something, that you're just trying to figure it out. And that's okay. So I think an openness to having honest conversations and doing that in a way that is respectful, and that kind of respect that you find in friendship is a really good kind of environment within which to start having those kind of conversations. Apart from that, I would say knowledge. Get woke. For those of you who don't know what woke means awake, seeing clearly, hearing clearly, understanding clearly what is actually going on. At the moment, there is just such a ton of information out there. There are podcasts, books, emails, TV shows, white papers, government papers. There are all kinds of content that we can engage with. And I've said to James, I've written down a list of some things that I found interesting and helpful. But it's really hard to challenge something that you can't see. And it's really hard to challenge something that you don't understand. And in order to do that, you've got to put in the time, do research, listen, read, listen some more, ask questions. I've kind of jotted down a couple of other things. And so this one is going to make probably everybody who's listening to this bristle a little bit. But
Great.
acknowledge that you have white privilege. You do. No matter what background you came in, no matter how rich or poor or educated or uneducated your house was, you have white privilege. It exists. And when I say that, the point of that is not to make you feel guilty about being white. It's making you aware that in a 100-meter race, that you're actually at the 50-meter mark when the gun is fired and they say go. There is a big step for me to overcome to get to equal with you. And I was taught that from an early age. I remember when my dad said to me when I was going to school, look, your first job is to make sure that people believe that butter would melt in your mouth, because at some point, something is going to happen that is going to make people instinctively want to point the finger at you. And by kind of trying to overcome that 50 meters, that gives you the opportunity that when that situation happens, they will have a little bit of doubt as to whether, I realize this person is the obvious culprit, the obvious person to pin this on. But actually, in light of all of this thing, I have a little bit of doubt that that might not be the case. If you are white, chances are that you have not ever had to think about that. Maybe you have, but you probably don't walk into your workplace and think, right, I need to try and be a little less African to make people feel comfortable. I need to not have afro hair at my new job because people don't like that and it makes people bristle. I need to work on being approachable and not speak in my language if my mum calls me on my phone at work. And inherent in all of those kinds of things, the fact that doors open for the very fact that you are white means that you have got white privilege. And you have to do some work to deconstruct feeling guilty about that, because we're not saying don't have white privilege, we're saying utilize that and become an ally. Use your voice where you can, amplify our voices where you can, use your vote, use your feet to protest, write your name on the bottom of a petition. If you are working in a company and you are in management and you realize that there is discrimination, whatever that might look like, baked in, do your part to deconstruct that, because if it's coming from you, it might be listened to rather than if it's coming from me. Which is, again, it is hard to do. But if you acknowledge that your whiteness puts you in a position where you have power and you can use that, then actually your privilege isn't something that you need to feel guilty about, provided that you are aware of it and that you are using it to be disruptive in a constructive way, to break down the things that are keeping others apart. And I don't even think that's just a race thing. I think that is discrimination in any single size, shape or form, wherever we find it, that in different situations all of us will have privileges and access to a society that other people don't. How do we use that for the benefit of the people who are around us, whose voices aren't heard and who don't have privileges that we've got? But don't just stick a black box on Instagram and be like, right, I've done Blackout Tuesday, cool, what's going on this week? Allyship is about taking joint ownership of that problem and then using the tools that you have to affect change, and willing to be that person who, you hear somebody make a racist comment at work or something, be the person who's like, hey, actually, I don't think that's cool, and I don't like what you're insinuating. Whereas our tendency is to go, oh gosh, they just said that, that's a clanger, no one's going to say anything, this is really awkward. That's actually passive. You have an opportunity to stand in and step in that place and choose to be an ally by being active and using your voice. Because if I say, hey, I'm not happy about that, I'm just an angry black woman who's doing what angry black women do. But if you say it, it's just like, oh, actually, that's not okay here. Next time I will perhaps think about using my voice differently. Or maybe I'll go and sit in a corner and think about myself long and hard.
Yeah. So the idea that kind of for us to be like silent in those moments, that neutrality, again, we are the police officers standing by, aren't we? And we're perpetuating the racist system and structure. And we need to, we were talking before this conversation began, weren't we, about how as a white person, for me, sometimes someone will say something and I'll feel uncomfortable challenging it, and my own discomfort means that I don't say anything. Well, me not being because I don't want to be uncomfortable isn't a good enough reason. Because I don't want to lose face socially, it's not a good enough reason. Because I think we might get into a row about it, it's not a good enough reason. Because it's, this is a much less costly conversation for me because it's happening to someone else, and I need to be willing to be uncomfortable to move towards a more equal society. I thought what you were saying about white privilege was really interesting and really helpful. And for me, the hope is that we might, those of us who are white would use our white privilege in the hope that one day that no longer exists, or we at least transition to a world where it's more equal. Because I don't want to be 50 meters ahead of you because of something as arbitrary as the color of my skin. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Before we hit record, you said that race is as much a social construct as it is anything else, and you said that there was a time when we didn't use color-based language to describe our. I thought that's incredible to me, that there was a time when race, the color of our skin, was less relevant, and actually,
they're really interesting papers on this, and some of these anthropological explorers they've traveled the world, and these are observations, and some of them they say things like, Well, everywhere else in the world, the color of people's skin is varied based upon the temperature, the climate that they live in. Apart from the blacks, they're weird and they are different, and it's something to do with their genes, but they are a completely different creation. And in the plantations, when they were doing censuses, they counted a black person as 3/5 of a human being, not a whole human being, 3/5 of a human being. And then you look at some of the stuff that happened on the plantations where they postulated that, can black people even be saved? Are they even human enough to know God? Are they even human enough to be able to take communion? Which, like, as a black woman in an Anglican church, discovering that completely blew my mind, that even within the church, we have a history of kind of taking that and using it for our advantage. And there was like a Negro Bible that had 60% of the stuff just kind of edited out, and it was all the stuff about equality and justice and hope. And as opposed to that being a tool for people to meet God, it then became like a system used for oppression. And again, it's just like, why is that, why was that constructed? And it was constructed to keep the black people oppressed, so slavery could continue, so people could carry on making profit. And when color in and of itself first appeared, that's what was going on. They needed a way to differentiate between people, so they could say, like, right, well, these people can be owners and they can get land, they are white, and these people are perpetually slaves, they are from a slavish race, and so they don't have rights, they count as 3/5 of a person. And so we're going to put them over here in this camp that we call black. And one drop of black makes you black, even if you've got 99 drops of white. And it's absurd. Like, when you sit back and you look at it and you think, gosh, there was a time where this didn't exist, and its creation in many ways was to be able to divide and split up the human race to make different bits of it a commodity for other bits. Just bonkers.
Yeah.
Ghana has a history of that, because slave ships left from Ghana and landed in Liverpool. That was a route from my home where I come from to my home where I now live. Ships went that route, bringing slaves. Just perplexing, to say the least.
Yeah, it's offensive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Man, okay. This is really hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is really hard. I feel like I want to apologise to you, Sefa, for the ways that I've benefited and collaborated with a system that has disadvantaged you and meant that you started 50 meters behind. That feels unacceptable to me, and unfair and unjust. And the idea that because of something as arbitrary as the colour of your skin, that society would treat you differently and treat you in a way that's different to me, and seek to dehumanize you and rob you, or try and rob you of the value that Jesus puts on you, is unacceptable. But to apologize feels a bit too cheap, to be honest, because sorry is really easy to say, isn't it? And so I guess what I would, as well as saying sorry for the ways that I've benefited, I want to say that I want to do better and live differently, and I want to be informed so that I can be an ally and help to amplify and see a change in our society, because it's my problem. And it's not something that's happening in another country, but it's a system that I help perpetuate. Because I'm helping to do that, then I want to change and I want to do better. So,
yeah, and that is ironically all that's what all the noise is about. To me, that is the most comforting thing, to know that it's seen and that it is valued, and it's not just going to end up like on the back of a postcard in the bottom of a drawer and people are never going to think about or talk about it again. That actually we make it as important as the other things, that our other values, the other things that we care about, that we're willing to look at it, face it, and deal with it head on. And the same goes from like within our Black communities. Like, we have bits of our communities where we look at colorism and tribalism, and that is important for us as a community to look at as well. Like within our own Black communities, it's important that we don't do to ourselves what we see other people doing to us, that we don't kind of copy that. But yeah, that is probably the most appropriate response that you could have given. So thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to say about the things that we've talked about, Sefa?
A couple of things. So when people talk about race, white people generally feel uncomfortable. Your inclination is to back away and not engage. And when we see that happening in front of us, and I see it happening in front of me, I can find that really hurtful and really sad. And so if you are willing to do the work, you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And my friend Danny has this beautiful line that she says about lots of different things, but she says, let it be your teacher. If you talk about race and you feel uncomfortable, let that discomfort be your teacher. Let it reveal to you what it is about race that makes you feel uncomfortable. Is it that you have prejudices that you don't want to look at? Is it that you benefit from a system? Is it that you don't care? Is it that you don't want conflict? What is the thing that makes you feel uncomfortable with talking about race? And sit with that. Don't just push it down or push it away or stick it on a shelf or say, it's fine, I'm not a racist because, or, well, I've got one Black friend, so I'm fine. Don't kind of push that discomfort to the fringes. Sit with it. Let it teach you and let it guide you. Because if you can face the discomfort, then you can start having meaningful and well-intentioned conversations about race, in my opinion. If you're not willing to sit and be uncomfortable, then it's probably not worth starting the conversation at all. I would actually prefer it if you didn't start the conversation at all, if you were not willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's good. Can you pray for us as we finish?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Lord God, I thank you that you created all men equal, and that you didn't create a race of people with thousands of different colours and put us in different boxes and categories. And Lord, we say as a community of people who love you, that we want to repent of all the different ways in which we've discriminated against different people of different backgrounds who look, feel, talk, think, interact differently to us. And we ask that you will give us your eyes that we may see, and your ears that we may hear, and your heart that we may understand the other, whoever the other happens to be in our lives. And we ask that as a nation and as a community, we won't squander the opportunity at these crossroads, and that you'll be the leading light down the path, and that you'll give us courage and confidence to walk in the direction that brings us closer to you and what you intended. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Sefa.
You are welcome, and thank you for being brave enough to invite me on to have a conversation, not knowing what on earth I was going to say. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. That's a really brave thing to do, and to put it out there and to be public about some of the things that you've experienced. Yeah, that's really brave. So thank you so much for doing that, Sefa.
Anytime.